Hi, welcome to Forever Wild, a podcast about family, memory, and the stories that shape who we become. I'm Meagan McGovern, the oldest of the four McGovern sisters.
And I'm Nora Gibbs, the youngest and the most charming of the McGovern girls. Together, we're sharing our journey growing up with an active father, a mother who didn't think that the rules applied to her, and a childhood full of chaos, adventure, and unforgettable moments.
Every episode, we're going to dive into stories that make us reflect about what it means to search for home, love, and family.
Thanks for joining us. This is Forever Wild.
Okay, so today, Nora and I decided that we were going to talk about the beginning of our adventure with our mother. What essentially happened is that our parents were married and they seemed normal to us. And then my father left and we went on a whirlwind adventure for about 10 years where we went all over the place. And then we started in California. We went to Australia. It involves Europe and the Bahamas and houses all across the United States, from Connecticut to South Carolina to Oregon and back.
Well, I think that, I know that in the last two episodes, we talked a lot about our parents and where they came from and how they got to where they ended up in California. And at this point, where we pick up the stories is when I'm 5 or 6 years old. And that's when you were much, much older than I was.
Oh, I was 50 at that point.
You're 10 or 11 at that point.
Right.
So
I'm 6 years older.
She's 6 years older than I am. So you have a lot of memories of these things that happen. And I have certain memories, core memories, as my children like to say. And I think that it's important that we talk about what we remember growing up. And all of this is what made us who we are. So that's what we're going to talk about today, what we remember and where our memories of the chaos started.
And so to start this story, to set the setting, we grew up until this point, when I was about 10 years old, in California, in the suburbs of California, outside Los Angeles. My father worked in television, and maybe we'll do a podcast one day about his acting and how he was on The Bionic Woman, and he hung out with Jack Nicholson, and he hung out with Paul Newman. And we knew all of the stories and all of the actors' names, and my mother said my father was going to be a movie star. And we left all of that behind when my father left, and there was a lot of drama to it, but my father ran off with my mother's best friend. Go figure. And my mother packed us up and took us on the road to New York. And I think it was the first time she'd been back to New York really to live, since she had left 10 or 12 years before. She wasn't sure if her family would take her in or where she was going. She had no income and hadn't worked in 15 years. So she was 40 with 4 small children under 10 years old, 4 girls under 10 years old. And we were, 4, 6, 8, and 10, I think, at this point.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine having 4 kids that were 4, 6, 8, and 10 and no husband and no income. And my father swore he wasn't going to pay child support, and having my husband leave me for my best friend. Okay, I'm never going to say she deserved it, but it should have expected it. I mean, he left his first wife for my mother, so he wasn't a shining example of loyalty and kindness and devotion or anything. And he said from the very beginning he didn't want to be married to her. So it wasn't like this was a shock, but
it's that whole thing that anytime you ever hear anybody cheating on them, you're like, okay, they cheated on their first spouse, they're going to cheat on you again. They're going to cheat on you. And it's nobody ever expects it to happen to them. And of course, it happened to her. I think we've already made it clear that neither of these people were meant to be together or especially kind and loving toward anybody else except for them.
So she left, and honestly, the journey to New York was a disaster. There was a big old Winnebago involved, and we had a German Shepherd with us. It was a huge, huge production to get us there. But
okay, I'm interrupting. Right. We had a German Shepherd, and it was summertime, I think, or late summer, and we drove across the desert, and I was probably 4 or 5 at this point. And we had Hansi was her name, And she was on the dashboard of the car. And I can remember these big, fluffy pieces of hair that would just come off of her in the air conditioning and fly through the whole art. So she had these big tufts of, it was awful. It was hot and gross and haunts you smell bad. And it was a long trip. I mean, California to New York in the 80s. I mean, 4 or 5 days on the road. I can't
Oh,
remember that.
I think it was more like 10 days. And I will give Mom credit for some kind of bravery because I don't want to do a road trip in a Winnebago with 4 little girls by myself with no cell phones. For whatever reason, I had flown ahead of all of you and I was already in New York with my aunt and uncle waiting for everybody. And it took 3, 4 days before we'd get a phone call because she couldn't, to call us, we'd have to stop at payphones. You remember, not everybody remembers payphones in the days before cell phones, but we had no way of knowing where she was. If she didn't call, she was just disappeared somewhere on the side of the road. But we got to New York and we all set up house. And my mother must have finagled some money from her father or from her brother or from somebody. And she, of course, did the most practical thing she could imagine. And we rented a house on 40 acres in the middle of the Adirondacks at the end of the summer in a place we had never been to, we didn't know anything about, and where we didn't know a single person. It was a town called Lake Luzerne, New York. It was beautiful, but the house was this weird house way up on a hill, way down a long dirt driveway. And it was the town, I don't know how many, the town had one pizza parlor and a gas station. And it was 2 hours from Albany and 5 hours from New York City. And we didn't know anything about where we were, what we were doing there. I don't remember why my mom went there. Probably because she liked the Adirondacks and the house was available and it was for rent.
I think for anybody who's not aware of where the Adirondacks are, they are 5.5 hours north of New York City and about an hour and a half, 2 hours south of Camp. It's deep in the heart of upstate New York, and it is cold. It's hard to get to, and there's little tiny towns every 15 miles up there. Because back in the olden days, when Megan was a baby, they used to have, they used to have like that's how far a carriage could go in a day. So that's why they were all these little towns up there, 15 miles apart, and the towns would have anywhere from people to 3,000 people spread out over, I don't even know how many miles, but 100 miles. And that's kind of how the Adirondacks was arranged, was little towns every 15 miles. And it's a hard place to live. It's very cold. It's very remote.
I mean, you're talking, it's almost another version of Appalachia, only a
Yeah.
colder version. It's people who have lived there for 200 years. They're set in their ways. They know that if you break down on the side of the road at 2 a.m., you will die because it might be negative 30 degrees outside and there might be 6 feet of snow coming that night. It's the kind of place where people will just stop and pick you up on the side of the road if you're broken down because they know the only other option is death. It's almost like Alaska in that way. It is not a welcoming place, but we had no idea of this because we were little kids and
And we
it
moved
was,
here in late summer. I mean, we
yeah,
didn't.
it was summer. We didn't know what was coming. We had
Right.
no idea how cold it was going to be. We had never seen snow
We were
at
from
this point.
California.
Right. And so the upshot of it is that by November, we were out of money. There was no, I was in a new school. I think I was in middle school at that point. I was probably in seventh grade, sixth or seventh grade. And I have no idea what my mother was planning to do for money or what she thought we were going to do. But by November, it was clear that my father wasn't going to give her any money, that the rent wasn't going to be paid. Her father wasn't going to give her any money. And she was supposed to go get a job, I think. But
The hell you say?
I don't think there was a concept anywhere in her that that was a realistic possibility.
Right.
I, she was just going to leave us at home and go get a job. I'm not sure what she thought she was going to do. But by November, it was clear that she was just going to say, fuck it. I do what I got to do and I'm going to make this happen. So we were gone for a weekend in November and we came back. We were off visiting relatives. And when we came back to the house, it was super dark and super cold and all the electricity was off. And it was a split level house where you walk in and there's a walk-in basement. And I went in first and I went down into the basement, which is where my bedroom was. And I walked straight into icy, icy water because the entire basement was flooded. And it turns out that we didn't understand how pipes work and we didn't understand how basically anything worked. And we had left pipes on or something unheated or something done while we were gone for the weekend. And we came home and the entire basement had 8 to 10 inches of water through the whole thing. But the basement was our living area. That was where at least 3 of the bedrooms in the house were. And somehow or another, my mother ended up with insurance money for that. And I don't know if she, well, I don't know. I don't know if she planned this.
I don't think she planned it, but I think it was that happy accident that foreshadowing. I think it showed her how easy it was to get money without working.
Well, she knew that. I mean, she always knew that, but I don't think she thought she could do it on her own.
Yeah.
And I don't think she thought of it as an actual plan. It was more of if you see an opportunity, you seize it. But I don't know why she would have had renter's insurance, but apparently she did. So maybe somebody had told her to get renter's insurance when she moved in. So she ended up with, I don't know, 12 grand from the renter's insurance for that. And I think that gave her the idea because by the time Christmas rolled around, we're talking 6 weeks later, when we all went back to my grandmother's house, she lived in New York, Scarsdale, outside of New York City. And we went down to my grandmother's house for Christmas, and I'm sure we went there so that my mother could hit up her parents for money. We were there for a couple of days, and we had some new friends we had made watching the house for us. And I remember being in bed in one of the bedrooms of my grandmother's house and hearing my mother answer the phone and having her talk to the people who were watching the house. And it was very clear to me that it was a conversation that the house was burned down and everything was gone and that my mother wasn't surprised and that this had been a plan and that the people who were there watching the house had burned it down for her and that everything we had that she wanted to save wasn't in the house but was in the barn next to the house. Because of course, when you've got 4 little kids and no money, you rent a house with a barn and outbuildings on 40 acres. But my mother then went out, and I heard all of this, and I don't know whether my mother was trying to hide it or didn't care at this point. But then she went out and told her mother and father that, oh my God, I can't believe this. The house burned down. This is awful. I don't know what we're going to do. Oh my God. Oh my God. And I think this was the day after Christmas. And we had to go back up to Lake Luzerne, where we'd lived for 4 or 5 months, and we had sort of maybe settled in. We had some friends. We had friends we went skating with. We liked it there, but we didn't like the cold. And we had to go back up to see our house and see what we could salvage. And Nora, do you remember any of this?
I remember bits and pieces. I remember being at grandma's house and knowing something bad had happened to our house, but it didn't register to me at that point that our whole house was gone. I remember going to kindergarten in that house. I remember learning how to button my coat and how excited I was to learn how to button my coat, how to zipper my coat, how to tie my shoes properly. And I remember a little bit about the fire. I remember there was a lot of anxiety amongst the family
Yeah.
members.
I mean, there was. And well, the night before we drove up to Lake Luzerne, whatever, we got there, it was dark. It was too dark to go see the house. And there was a newspaper from the town that had a story about Maureen McGovern and her 8 children or something, because everybody thought we had such a big family. It was all wrong. And I was very irritated by that. And the next morning we went to see it first thing in the morning. And I was expecting a house that looked like it had had a fire, but there was a hole in the ground where the basement was. And it was just a smoldering, burning, nasty lump of ash and soot and wet.
Wow.
And the smell still sticks with me. And I could see a refrigerator in the middle of it that was twisted and white, and you could recognize a refrigerator. But there was nothing there. It wasn't a house that wasn't a house with a roof and a structure. It had all collapsed in on itself in a smoldering hole in the ground.
Wow.
And
for that.
well, and it was snowing on top of it and hissing. And I don't think mom was expecting that either, because I, I can feel the visceral effect of me. I can still think about it. I can smell the smoke. I can see the snow hissing on it. And I don't know if mom would have taken us there
Right.
if she knew. I don't think she was thinking about the effect on us at all. I think she was thinking, I need some money because I need to get out of here because the Adirondacks is a terrible idea. What am I doing here? I need out. But I know how much my daughter loves her stuff.
Right.
I know how much my daughter loves her bedroom. And I don't know whether mom didn't think about any of this or thought this isn't really their home because we had moved so much. But I would never take Scout to the remains of a burned out stump of a house and show her this wasteland, especially if I knew she had heard that I did it. Mom had in her head somewhere, she knew I had heard all of this. So I don't know how she, I don't know. I don't know how she reconciled that in her head.
Well, I think, and this goes back to something you said before, that she was able to justify anything she did in, I'm doing it for my kids, and the end justifies the means, right? Like, I'm doing this, it it's gonna hurt, but we'll have money, so we'll be fine. And I do remember looking through the barn for my stuffed animals, like looking for
Mhm.
things that I,
Nope.
that I
Nope.
wanted.
She
There was
saved,
this
no.
whole box of my stuff that I do remember looking through and being excited, but then being sad that the rest of it wasn't there. So,
I think she saved some photo albums and some books and paperwork. And I remember her saying, oh, well, just tell the people that we just hadn't unpacked everything yet. So anything she wanted to keep, she had put in the barn in a couple of boxes and said we hadn't unpacked it yet.
right.
But she didn't go through my stuff and save my stuffed animals or save the things that were important to me. And I remember a necklace I'd gotten for graduation from sixth grade, and that was gone. And just some my stuffed animals and things that meant a lot to me. And it didn't matter. We were on the road. 2 or 3 days later, we were just gone. And we were on our way to Texas and in the back of I think it was a station wagon with Hansi.
Yeah.
And we left it behind. And she was excited and happy and thrilled that we were going. And one of the things that was her kind of a catchphrase or the way that she thought, and two of her sisters have said this at some point in their lives too. And we're not going to get into a lot of stuff with two of her sisters because they have different stories than we do. And if they want to tell things from their version, they can. But there's a phrase that's, I had no other choice. I had to do this.
Right.
I had no other options. And obviously, I don't agree with that. I think there's always another option besides burning your house down in front of your 4 kids. But I think that my mom did believe that. I think that she believed that given her options of watching CPS come and take the kids or having my father have control over our life or watching us starve to death or, God forbid, getting a job and going on food stamps,
Yeah.
this was her only option. And so that was it. That was the beginning of the next 10 years of going from place to place to place to try
Well,
to
I think
find a
I
home.
think it's important to also note here that she did burn the house down for the insurance money, but her cousin who lived in the area was in charge of the insurance policy, and it didn't pay out. And it wasn't his fault it didn't pay out. I think they realized that it was arson pretty quickly on. And I don't know if it's because he was involved or not, but she was not ever hurt. She was never
Charged.
held
No.
responsible for.
Well, I think they couldn't prove it was arson because we were gone at the time.
Right.
So the house might have been set by arson, but they would have had to do an investigation to see who did it. And it was very, very convenient that we left town 3 days later. And so we all went to Houston thinking that we would get an insurance payout. I think it was not life-changing sum of money. I think it was $17,000, which is not enough to start over if you have no furniture and nothing, and
But
no car.
again, $17,000 in the 80s is what, $80,000 now, $100,000 now.
No, is it?
Yeah, it's a lot. Let me get my trusty calculator out.
But maybe it was 14,000, whatever it was a lot of money. It was enough money to get started. And it was for all of the furniture and everything we had in the house, but she never got it. And so we went to Houston with whatever my grandfather had given us for Christmas, probably, a few $100.
$50,000. It's the equivalent of $50,000.
Okay. So that's enough to get you down for a few months. It's enough to make you want to burn down your house. I mean, hell, I want to burn down my house some days just so I don't have to take care of all this stuff and clean it. And I like the idea of starting over.
I mean, $50,000 is more than a lot of people make in a year.
It is.
You know,
So given that, we went to Houston and we were there in one house, and then we lived in another house, and we became Texans, and we were in one house for 3 months and one for 6 months and one for another 3 months. And
I would
I
like to
hated it.
say that we lived in Houston in Kingwood, which is north of Houston. And it was in February of my kindergarten year. And I know this because it was rodeo time in Houston. And I know that it was rodeo time because we had an art contest at my school at Kingwood. And I won the best picture for all of Houston kindergartners. And I got to go, I drew a picture of, it was supposed to be like Purple Mountains Majesty. And so I drew a picture of these purple mountains and a cowgirl falling off a horse or a cowgirl riding a horse. And it was fantastic. And I won this great art show out of all of Houston for rodeo. And we all got to go to rodeo. And they called me up on stage to present me with my trophy. And I burst into tears because it was in the Astrodome in the 80s. And the Astrodome is huge. And they called me up and the guy laughed at me. He said, "Darling," he said, "this trophy is bigger than you are." And I burst into tears and ran off the stage. So that first segue into public speaking.
And you still have the trophy and the picture, right?
For sure, it's in storage somewhere. Not at my house, but in one of the many storage lockers around the country. If anyone listening sees a picture somewhere of that, please let me know because I would love to have that back. I do know it was left behind many years later in Glens Falls, New York, at storage.
Oh, that's interesting. It made it that far. That must have been
I held
over.
onto it. I held onto it for a long time. I carried through many moves as long as I could, and it held on until I was about 14. Yeah,
Which is a good many moves at that point.
for sure.
And so this whole period here is kind of a blur. We went all over Houston. I didn't like Texas. My sister Katie loved Texas and fit right in, and she was a good fit, and she made friends everywhere we went.
Well, she also
Northern,
had hair, and you know Texas. I mean, the bigger the hair, the closer to Jesus. So
well, Katie's friendly and cheerful, and she was outgoing, and she was pretty. And
Yeah.
Morgan was friendly and cheerful and outgoing and pretty. And you were a chameleon who could fit in anywhere.
and also pretty. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to mention that every time I mention you. And I was a weird kid who looked really weird and didn't know where I was or what I was doing and didn't fit in anywhere. But I had books, so it didn't matter.
Right.
And so after a year, Houston wasn't working because there was still no money and still, I don't know why she thought there was going to be more money somewhere else or what she thought she was going to do for money. I really don't know what her actual plan was, but we would move somewhere for 3 or 4 months. And after 2 or 3 months, the landlord would realize that we weren't going to pay rent for the next month and give us 30 days notice. And then she'd have to go to her father or to my father and to say, okay, I need first and last in a new house. And it would never be an apartment, and it would never be a trailer, and it would never be something small. It would always be a 4-bedroom house, sometimes with a pool and 2 stories and a big yard. And she'd get first, last, and deposit on the house. And we would move. And then 3 months later, the landlord would realize she didn't have the rent, and we'd move again. And so then we would I think we ended up in Los Angeles within maybe 15 months of leaving LA for the first time. We went all the way to New York, burned the house down, then ended up all over the place and ended up back in LA because I think she thought she could shake my father down for some more money at that point.
I feel like she thought, and I remember having conversations with her about this, that if she were closer to him, it would be easier to have him contribute money. She could literally go there and get money from him instead of just
That he wouldn't let us starve, that he might be a monster, but he wouldn't be that kind of monster, that if he could see us and participate in our lives, that he wouldn't let us starve.
Well, and I think this also goes back to she really loved her father. She had a really good relationship with her father when they were kids, when she was a kid. And her father was a very good father to her. And I think that my own thought is that there was a part of her that wanted us to have a relationship with her father. And I could be way out of left field here, but I do think that she wanted at some point us to have a relationship.
Oh, I was devastated. I was crazy about daddy. I thought he was the best guy in the whole world. I couldn't wait to move home to be with him. But I was heartbroken that, he was living with mom's best friend and there were all sorts of issues with it. And mom said he was a terrible monster and that he was the worst man on the planet. I didn't care. I wanted my dad. I was thrilled to be going back. But I also think this was the 80s. Women were supposed to be taken care of by their husbands. And I think that there was an expectation by our family, by mom's sisters and brother and father, that her 4 kids were not their responsibility. They were her husband's responsibility. And that if he wasn't paying rent and child support, that maybe she just needed to go back where he was and maybe he would take her back because at least she hadn't been their problem when maybe she could fix it.
Right.
I think this story kind of is the beginning of where her scams really took off and where all of the plans took off and where you see her go from, hey, the insurance money thing isn't working to, I have a plan to make money. And from here on out, it is all about mom and her plans to actually make money, not from insurance scams and not from stealing, but from grand plans and grand ideas and things that will work. Not jobs, mind you, and not careers, but a plan to make money. And in the next episode, we're going to go over the plan that worked and kind of the turning point in what kept us going because, yeah, my father didn't come through. Spoiler alert, this was not going to be my father contributing to everything.
Right.
So I guess out of all of that, one of the things that you always wonder about, Nora, and we both talk about this a lot, is knowing that we didn't have a home and knowing that we didn't have a hometown and that there's a sense, and you say you don't even remember it, but for me, it was very clear that everything that you have as a possession could go overnight and just be taken away. And that if you want something, you want to keep something, you need to keep it close by you at all times, honestly. You
Right.
can't leave your house for a night without taking what you care about because it might be gone when you come back. I mean, how do you think that affected you and how you live right now?
Well, it's funny. I was talking to my daughter Charlotte about this yesterday that when I travel, I always have a bag with me that has everything that I need immediately if there were something to happen. It has medication, it has my laptop, it has my jewelry, it has my makeup, and has everything, and it is on me at all times. And I'm very into being organized and having a lot of shit. I have a lot of crap. As you guys know, I have a lot of Christmas stuff that you guys make fun of because I love Christmas. I love holidays. I love big holidays. And I have a storage locker filled with Christmas crap because I love tradition. I love being in the same place year after
But that's what was taken from us, though.
I know.
Was tradition and anything sentimental and anything that you want to go back to the next year and say, I loved the way that looked on the tree. Let's do this ornament again. Or I remember this ornament from when I was a kid. All of it is gone.
Right. So I've been very intentional about having my family and doing the same thing year after year and making sure that my kids have traditions to the point where Cheryl was going off to college this summer. So this last year I did Big Christmas because she was like, I said, oh, I don't want to get the village out this year. It's a lot because I have a full Christmas village. I said, it's a lot of work to get the village out. She said, but it's my last Christmas at home. You have to have it out. And I was thinking, okay. And then when I was putting it away, I said, oh, good. I don't have to do it next year. And she said, then it'll be my first year coming home from college. Of course you have to have it out. So I got bamboozled by a 17-year-old. But it was the same thing with Emily. She hated the village. She thought it was such a pain in the ass. But when she came home, she was so thankful that I had moved out. Came out. So, I think that those little traditions matter.
You know what's funny is I have a sense of, I live in two worlds. There's one part of me that lives out of a backpack, and that's all I need. And I have always had that, always, always, that I can go with my backpack and go for a month. I don't need anything and I don't care about anything. And there's a part of me that wants to just keep going and going. I don't care where my home is. I can sleep anywhere. I would love to go live in Europe for a year and stay a week here, a week there, a week there. I don't have that need to be home and in my own bed. And there's also the reality that I have a farm with 9 acres and 2 outbuildings, and I have a barn full of half projects, and I have a basement with all sorts of projects that I want to do. And I could not wait to buy this house and tear down walls and knock holes in the walls and put up my own art and have everything that I want exactly the way I wanted it, because I was never allowed to put holes in walls, and I was never allowed to have my stuff. I was never allowed to put things the way I wanted to put them. And I couldn't paint. I couldn't express who I was I'm not like a great designer where I need to have things fancy, but it's nice to have your own bed. It's nice to have your own set of sheets, and it's nice to have the right blanket that you like and a lamp next to your bed. And there were so many houses where we never even lived there long enough for us to have a nightstand with a lamp on top and a reading chair in the room. And that's like the first thing I did when I move into a new house with my kids is I make sure that every kid has a bed and a bed frame and a lamp and books in the room and a bookshelf and all the things that they matter and they don't, because I
Right.
can live out of a backpack. You don't need those things.
But once you've lived out of the backpack, you don't want to anymore. And you want to option if you need to, but
Yeah.
don't want to do it. I mean, I'm the biggest homebody there ever is. And I'm like to the point where I don't want to leave my house. I love to travel, but
Right.
while I'm traveling, I think the whole time, God, I wish I were in my own bed. God, I wish I were on my couch with my dog in my house, doing
Yeah.
my thing, having my coffee, because I'm so set in my ways now, because I have been able to build a life intentionally with the things that I love that no one can come and take from me, and no one can say, hey, you're going to have to move. You know what? You're trying to take my house from me? Fuck you. I will kill you. Pardon my
And
French.
there's a sense, and I think finally, I'm 55. So finally, I think just because I'm old enough now that it doesn't have the same, I don't know, feel to it. When I was young, anytime something good happened to me, I would just say, I'm going to enjoy this now. I'm going to enjoy it right now because I got to enjoy it because it might not be here
Right.
later. And when I met Mark and I knew that I was crazy about him, I said, okay, well, I'm going to enjoy it for what it is because maybe it won't last. And then we got engaged and I said, well, hey, I've gotten engaged. That's all that matters. I had a chance to be engaged to a fantastic man. And then we got married and I was convinced he was going to be dead in a year because nothing good lasts and everything I have that's good is going to be taken from me. And I kept trying to say to myself that it's okay. This is enough because I've had more than I ever expected to have. I've had more than many people get. Many people don't ever get this kind of happiness. A lot of people never find their true one. So it's okay that if this is it and he dies or we don't get to have kids or I don't get to have a house. This is more than I thought I would have.
Right.
And so that has to be enough. But now we've been together 30 years. I can't say, well, it's not going to last. If it ended tomorrow, well, we did get 30 good years out of it. I don't know how much of that is just childhood trauma. I don't know how much of that is just having a vivid imagination and being neurodiverse. And how much of it is I stood in front of this gaping hole that had everything I loved in it. And how do you reconcile that, with being able to have nice things?
Well, I mean, I'm not a therapist, but I've watched a lot of therapy. I feel like if you stand in the front of a gaping hole, it was your home with your mother, and you know that she burnt it to the ground, you're going to be a little fucked up in the head.
I'm not. I'm fine.
I am totally fucked in the head, and I understand it, and I know what it's from. I know it's from a chaotic childhood. I will always want to walk through my backyard and be thankful and show gratitude to the universe for letting me have this in this moment because we didn't have it for so long. And I'm anybody who knows me who works with me, they know that I'm one of the most grateful people that has ever existed because I never thought that I would have an opportunity to have a career that I would have. I've been with my 27 years now. Like there's such an amount of gratitude that I don't know if you can have. I'm sure people will argue with this. I don't know if you can have if you did have things handed to you. If you had everything, if you grew up in the suburbs or wherever with the same parents and money and never having to worry about anything, I don't know if that gratitude is the same as mine, given that I've had to work hard for it and didn't have it and literally had it all set on fire.
I think if you grow up with the expectation that you are always going to have a comfortable bed with a lamp next to it and electricity that works and running water, and that nothing in your house will flood or catch on fire, and that everything you have is the baseline, that anything over that you are grateful for, but anything under that you are annoyed by.
Well, and I think also, I mean, the trust, right? I think there's a big thing we're not talking about here is that we didn't trust mom or you didn't trust mom. You must have lost a lot of trust for her and respect for her. As much as the 10-year-old can have respect for their mother or not knowing what that is, but that feeling must have shifted for you that, holy
But,
shit, maybe she isn't out for my best interest.
oh, I don't know. I think I was so aligned with her at that point. She was the only thing keeping us from being in that box with the ashes. She was the only thing keeping us from being with CPS. I knew that was the worst thing possible.
Right.
She was the only one out there fighting for us. And so I think that I still trusted her to keep us safe. I just didn't trust the world anymore. I didn't trust that the world was a safe place. But I knew as long as we were with mom, we would have a place to go. And I now, obviously, I see it all differently. And that, of course, she was the problem, not the solution. But I think if you've got somebody who's your life raft, you don't go swimming off in search of bigger and better ships. They might be out there, but you're not leaving the life raft. And mom was the life raft. I couldn't see that she was the one sinking the ships around us.
She was setting the ship on fire and saying,
Yeah, she's setting the ship on fire and saying, come to the life raft. I'm the only place of safety.
I do
And
remember in that moment, and for that moment at that time, I remember being thankful and very surprised that none of our animals were hurt. We had a lot of animals on the time, and that none of us were home, and how lucky it was that we weren't there. And I
well,
felt
yeah, it
really,
wasn't like I wasn't going to go tell my 4-year-old sister that mom burned the house down. When did you know that? When did you find out? Or was that just family lore and you always remember it?
honestly, I think I must have been about 16. I think it was just one of those things that, okay, she wouldn't do that. Like when I think I was 15 or 16 when I started really knowing what she was capable of. And it was at that
Well,
point
lucky
I had a lot of
you.
questions. Yeah.
You
You
know,
learned
it's
a lot
funny.
earlier than I did. You know,
It's funny. There was an article in one of the newspapers the other day that said something about the grudges that the oldest sister holds and how there's a lot of research about oldest siblings and especially oldest girls and what they are made to shoulder and bear that younger sisters don't. And I thought, you don't know the half of it. You have no idea. But I also always thought you got the short end of it because you didn't get to live with mom as long. And mom held it together till I was out of high school. Well, not really held it together. You know what I mean?
right.
But at the same time, yeah, I got a lot
I
of,
mean, you got to have a high school experience. I didn't get,
right,
obviously, we both have our childhood trauma. From this.
right.
I did remember living with dad a little bit, not very much, but I remember the little things about him back when we were in California. One of my favorite stories of dad is that I do remember is he was working for Sesame Street at the time. I don't know what he was doing, crew chief on Sesame Street. And they had a scene set in a candy shop. And at the end of the day, they had nothing left to do with candy. So dad brought home boxes and boxes and boxes of candy. And he threw it all on the pool table in the living room or in whatever.
Because of course we had a pool table.
Of course we had a pool table. And it was filled. I mean, there was candy about 3 feet high on the pool table. I mean, just to give you some idea of what we're talking about. And I remember thinking I was the luckiest kid in the world to have this bag for. So like literally they bought me with candy. That's
pretty cheap. I mean, we got to do so many cool things. We always thought we were the coolest family. What we didn't say in all of this is that while we were in New York, we went to the museum and we went to all the different museums in New York. And we went all up and down experiencing all the cool things in New York City. And my mother took us to all sorts of cool places. And even on the trip from, say New York to Houston, we would have stopped at every cool national park and every cool side trip and gone to all the cool exhibits. And she would have told us stories about each one. And
we would have we would have swam in pools at hotels and had a great time with it. I've eaten in Howard Johnson's along the road. And, I have a lot of fun memories of being a kid and fun road trip memories.
And every time that we stopped at a hotel, we would hear a different version of the food from that area, or a story about some celebrity who had lived there, or how this tied into popular culture, or the history of the Appalachians, or wherever we were. There was always, we were essentially homeschooled without being homeschooled.
We're car schooled.
Car schooled. So I think we're going to wrap up this episode here. And next episode, we're going to go into the plans that my mom had and which ones worked and which ones didn't. But this has been more cathartic than I thought it would. I didn't ever think I would get emotional over my childhood again. I thought I was over all that.
You guys are lucky this is not video because I think there were some tears on her eyes. I'm not going to lie.
Not me. I have no emotions. Anyway, thank you for listening to Forever Wild.
And as always, if you enjoyed this episode, let us know. Leave a review, find Meagan on Facebook, or share it with somebody who loves a good story.
And we'd love to hear from you. This was our 3rd episode, and we're just getting our groove here. We want to hear your thoughts, your questions. We want to know what resonates and what you'd like to hear more about.
And until next time, as always, stay well.
Bye.